you know. I mean, do you know why I do what I do? The reason why I do what I do is because it's what everybody wants to do.
He was the bat-biting madman who defined a generation, a frontman whose haunting vocals and chaotic antics helped give birth to an entire genre. But behind the wild eyes and dark eyeliner of Ozzy Osbourne was a man who never quite played by the rules, and that's exactly why so many of his peers couldn't stand him. Ozzy was never just a singer. He was a walking contradiction, a performer who stumbled from stage to scandal and back again, leaving a trail of chaos, fame, and friction in his wake. Fans worshipped him, critics dissected him, and fellow musicians? Many kept their distance, some out of fear, others out of flat-out contempt. For every screaming crowd at an Ozfest, there was someone in the shadows calling him a clown, a fraud, a caricature of metal's past. And while Ozzy reveled in the madness, certain artists took offense at how his fame eclipsed what they believed real music should be. These weren't just petty squabbles. These were deep philosophical differences, battles over what metal was supposed to be and who had the right to represent it. Some of these rivalries erupted in public view, while others simmered behind closed studio doors, turning respect into resentment. And though Ozzy's influence is undeniable, the truth is not everyone wanted to be in the same room with him, much less share a stage. Today we dive deep into 6 musicians who, for very personal reasons, couldn't stand the Prince of Darkness, a journey into the darker side of metal's most iconic figure. One of the most famous feuds in heavy metal history came not from tabloids or Twitter, but from within the very band that started it all. When Ronnie James Dio took Ozzy's place in Black Sabbath in 1979, fans were divided, some loyal to Ozzy's raw, unfiltered energy, others mesmerized by Dio's operatic vocals and mystical lyrics. But beneath the surface of that lineup, change was a tension that ran far deeper than professional rivalry. According to those close to both singers, Dio viewed Ozzy as a chaotic figure who got by on personality and shock, not musical discipline. He reportedly told friends that Ozzy's theatrics turned metal into a sideshow, more about biting heads off bats than crafting epic narratives. To Dio, metal was mythology, dragons, swords, fantasy worlds, and he took pride in technical precision and vocal mastery. In contrast, Ozzy's appeal lay in his unpredictability, his slurred interviews, his dark humor. The two men represented opposite poles of the same genre, Dio the scholar, Ozzy the showman. Their paths crossed at festivals and in the press. But the animosity was never far from the surface. Insiders claim Dio once refused to share a photo shoot with Ozzy, calling it cartoon metal versus real music. And though they shared a legacy, they never truly shared mutual respect. It wasn't about egos, it was about a fundamental disagreement on what metal should be. Dio wanted to lift metal to the heavens. Ozzy wanted to drag it into the fire. That contrast made for great music and terrible friendships. Not all tensions stem from band shakeups or artistic rivalry. Some are generational, and that's where Phil Anselmo enters the picture. As the aggressive, growling voice of Pantera, Anselmo was the face of groove metal in the 90s, a raw, guttural answer to the polished glam of the decade before. To him, Ozzy Osbourne wasn't a trailblazer anymore. He was a relic, a symbol of everything Pantera was fighting against. In multiple interviews, both public and private, Anselmo hinted at his disdain for what he called nostalgia metal. While Ozzy was filling arenas with old-school fans chanting along to Crazy Train, Pantera was trying to break new ground with heavier, darker sounds. Anselmo felt that the media gave Ozzy too much credit for innovations he hadn't fully developed. In backstage encounters, he reportedly refused to greet Ozzy, telling witnesses, "I don't need to shake hands with ghosts." There was no love lost between them. Even as Ozzy attempted to stay relevant with newer projects and collaborations, Anselmo dismissed them as marketing stunts rather than true evolution. One chilling moment came during a joint festival lineup in the mid-90s, when Pantera's crew reportedly blocked any shared press opportunities with Ozzy's team. When asked why, a member of Pantera's camp simply said, "We don't pay tribute." To cartoons? Harsh words, yes, but they revealed just how deep the rift ran. For Anselmo, Ozzy was the past. And the past in his eyes had no place in the future of metal. But perhaps one of the most surprisingly bitter rivalries came from within Ozzy's own backyard, not America's metal scene, but Britain's. Enter Bruce Dickinson, the leather-lunged leader of Iron Maiden, a man whose voice could rattle stadiums and whose intellect rivaled his musical talent. Dickinson has always been fiercely protective of what he considers the integrity of metal, a genre that, to him, deserves sophistication, story, and structure. And when he looked at Ozzy, he didn't see a fellow craftsman. He saw a performer who made metal into a spectacle. In private conversations that later leaked to the press, Dickinson compared Ozzy's stage shows to a circus act, all smoke, no soul. While Iron Maiden composed multi-part epics rooted in literature and history, Ozzy was spraying foam guns and staggering across the stage to pre-recorded intros. At one European festival, tensions boiled over when Dickinson allegedly told a group of journalists, "If he's the Prince of Darkness, then I'm the Emperor of Thought." Fans chalked it up to ego, but insiders knew it was more than that. Dickinson felt that Ozzy's antics gave the mainstream media a reason to mock metal, as if the genre were all eyeliner and outrageous stunts, with no substance underneath. And while the two men never threw punches, their words were sharp enough. Years later, when both were inducted into various halls of fame, Dickinson notably skipped one ceremony where Ozzy was being honored, telling fans at a show, "I'm here for the music, not the mythology." For Bruce, metal was serious business. And Ozzy? Well, Ozzy was the jester in a court. Dickinson refused to attend. Not all of Ozzy's enemies wore leather and held microphones. Some came from unexpected corners of the music world, like Boy George, the colorful frontman of Culture Club, who had more in common with Ozzy than most would assume. Both were British icons. Both struggled publicly with addiction. And both were seen as eccentric outliers in their respective scenes. But their brief, bizarre feud in the late 80s and early 90s was one for the books. After a chance meeting, at a charity event, Boy George reportedly described Ozzy as smelling like Satan and talking like a mad priest. Ozzy fired back in an interview, calling George a guy who looks like a clown and sings like a hairdryer. The exchange might have been dismissed as playful banter if it hadn't spiraled. For years afterward, the two artists took potshots at each other in interviews, award show speeches, and even books. Boy George claimed Ozzy represented toxic masculinity and eyeliner, while Ozzy labeled George a walking makeup tutorial with a microphone. Their feud wasn't just personal, it symbolized the clash between two different cultural expressions. Ozzy's chaotic masculinity versus George's flamboyant defiance of gender norms. While neither artist was part of the other's genre, their animosity was a strange collision of fame, identity, and the need to defend one's public image. In the end, their feud never resolved. And perhaps that's fitting. Two icons from different planets, united only by the fact that neither could understand the other's orbit. Then there was Axl Rose, the unpredictable fireball behind Guns N' Roses, known for his temper, his talent, and his complete disregard for authority. It's almost poetic that he and Ozzy would clash, considering how similar they were in spirit. But that similarity might be what drove them apart. Axl admired Ozzy's legacy, sure, but he didn't respect the man behind it. In a 1992 interview, Axl alluded to a backstage altercation where Ozzy allegedly insulted one of Axl's bandmates. He was wasted, loud, and didn't recognize who he was talking to, Axl said before adding, "Some legends don't know when to stop." The feud escalated when Guns N' Roses and Ozzy were scheduled to play at the same event, and Axl insisted that their dressing rooms be placed on opposite ends of the venue. He didn't want Ozzy anywhere near him. For his part, Ozzy seemed largely unfazed, brushing off the tension in his usual, bewildered fashion. "I don't remember half of what I say," he joked. But Axl wasn't laughing. For years, he refused to comment on Ozzy publicly, other than to suggest that some people confuse legacy with relevance. It was a brutal assessment from one chaotic icon to another, and a reminder that even among rebels, lines are drawn. Finally, we reach the last name on our list, and it may surprise you. It wasn't a singer or a guitarist or even someone from the metal world. It was Sharon Osbourne's own father, Don Arden, the music manager and industry powerhouse who once oversaw Black Sabbath's early years before Ozzy was ever a solo star. Arden despised Ozzy not because of his music, but because he believed Ozzy stole his daughter and his business. When Sharon chose to manage Ozzy after his exit from Sabbath, she effectively split from her father, creating a family feud that turned into a decades-long grudge match. Don Arden called Ozzy a manipulative fool and accused him of brainwashing Sharon. He even once claimed that Ozzy had ruined the music industry by turning management into a family affair. The feud was deeply personal, filled with betrayal, lawsuits, and emotional scars. It wasn't about riffs or records, it was about love, loyalty, and power. For years, Don and Sharon didn't speak. And while Ozzy tried to make peace near the end of Arden's life, the damage had been done. Sometimes the people who hate you most aren't on the stage. They're at the dinner table. And in Ozzy's case, his greatest antagonist might not have been another metal god, but the man who once controlled his fate, only to lose it to the chaos of love. It should stand on musical merit, not on how many dead animals you can mutilate on stage. That line, reportedly muttered by Bruce Dickinson during an off-record rant to a photographer, summed up everything he felt about Ozzy Osbourne's brand of heavy metal. The clash between these two giants of British rock wasn't just about style. It was a war over metal soul. By the mid-1980s, tensions were boiling, especially during the tour circuit wars. At an exclusive industry party in 1984, Dickinson, riding high on Iron Maiden's international dominance, reportedly refused to be photographed with Ozzy when pressed. He supposedly snapped, "Some associations damage your credibility as a serious musician." For Dickinson, it wasn't personal, it was philosophical. He saw metal as a craft, something to be studied, composed, revered. Ozzy, in his eyes, was circus, all stunts and no substance. That stance never changed, not even with time. Decades later, when Dickinson was asked to name the most influential metal vocalists of all time, he skillfully dodged Ozzy's name. Instead, he highlighted figures like Ian Gillan and Robert Plant, artists he believed had both skill and dignity. But if Dickinson's disdain ran cold and intellectual, Dave Mustaine's was white-hot and deeply personal. As Megadeth's fiery frontman and one of thrash metal's founding fathers, Mustaine wore his grudges like armor, and his hatred for Ozzy Osbourne reportedly stemmed from a rejection that wounded him at the height of his ambition. The conflict sparked in the mid-1980s, during the years when Mustaine was clawing to prove Megadeth's superiority after being ousted from Metallic. According to Bernard Doe of Metal Forces magazine, Mustaine approached Ozzy's team for a collaboration, maybe an opening slot, maybe something more, only to be turned away without consideration. That dismissal hit hard. Years later, a former Megadeth roadie told Revolver magazine that Mustaine saw Ozzy's silence as condescension, like he was looking down on thrash metal as angry noise, music for kids with no real vision. What made it worse was a quote from Ozzy himself in a 1987 British interview. "These new thrash bands are just angry kids making angry noise. Where's the melody? Where's the soul?" It wasn't hard to guess who that comment was aimed at, and industry insiders say Mustaine heard about it immediately. The rivalry only deepened in the 90s as Ozzfest became the dominant touring festival for metal. But despite Megadeth's critical and commercial success, they weren't invited to the early lineups. Mustaine blamed politics and certain dinosaurs, as he called them, who didn't want to share the spotlight with the new generation. At a 1998 awards show, witnesses claim Mustaine turned away when Ozzy was introduced to him, muttering, "Respect is earned, not inherited." The slight didn't go unnoticed. Ozzy, reportedly puzzled by the hostility, said nothing in return, but his silence only fueled the fire. Then came Blackie Lawless, a name not often mentioned in casual metal debates today, but back in the 1980s he was a shock rock force to be reckoned with. As the mastermind behind WASP, Lawless turned every stage into a grotesque theater of blood, fire, and nightmares. But while his act screamed chaos, Lawless saw himself as a meticulous artist. And Ozzy? He saw Ozzy as an amateur, a pale, sloppy imitation. The feud, though not widely known among casual fans, ran deeper than many suspected. According to Circus Magazine editor Catherine Turman, Lawless privately referred to Ozzy as a one-trick pony who got lucky with a bat, mocking his infamous live stunt as a gimmick that masked a lack of true creativity. What really infuriated Lawless was how Ozzy's brand of mayhem, erratic, often nonsensical, was filling stadiums, while his own more choreographed, horror-themed productions were being dismissed as over-the-top. To Lawless, there was a clear line between art and chaos, and Ozzy had crossed it, then made millions off it. "You're not an artist if you're just throwing guts on stage," he told a French metal magazine in 1985. "You're not touching people emotionally, you're just shocking them like a B-movie. That's not art, that's a factory." While Lawless never named Ozzy directly in interviews, the targets were obvious, especially when he dropped lines like, "Some people mistake accidents for artistry," and rather than finding common ground during the infamous PMRC hearings, where both WASP and Ozzy were targeted by American censors for being morally corrupting, their rivalry only deepened. At a closed-door industry meeting related to the hearings, Lawless reportedly refused to sit at the same table as Ozzy, allegedly saying, "I won't be associated with amateur hour." Even years later, when speaking about the history of shock rock, Lawless would skip right past Ozzy's name, instead praising Alice Cooper and other acts he considered more authentic. But none of these feuds, however bitter, cut as deep as the one that came from within Ozzy's own world, a feud with his former bandmate and co-creator of the Black Sabbath legacy. Guitarist Tony Iommi. For most fans, Sabbath was sacred, the birthplace of metal, the fusion of doom, riff, and ritual. But behind the scenes, the relationship between Iommi and Ozzy had rotted from brotherhood into barely concealed contempt. It began in the late 1970s, as Ozzy's drug abuse and erratic behavior grew intolerable, even for a band known for its indulgence. According to former Sabbath manager Patrick Mee Jr., Iommi had told associates that Ozzy was no longer a frontman, he was a liability in leather pants, dragging the band's music into the gutter. What made this feud so devastating was its personal depth. Iommi didn't just lose a bandmate, he felt betrayed by someone who had once shared a vision, someone who, in his words, had turned their dark art into a traveling freak show. Unlike other rivalries that simmered in gossip columns, this one unfolded through decades of tense reunions that felt more like financial transactions than reconciliation. During their 1997 reunion rehearsals, insiders claimed Iommi barely acknowledged Ozzy, speaking only when giving musical direction. The warmth was gone, the chemistry erased. Even during their Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction, body language experts noted the awkward distance between them, and fans couldn't help. But notice Iommi's speech avoided mentioning Ozzy's name entirely, instead praising the musical legacy of Black Sabbath. It was, perhaps, the cruelest wound of all, being hated not by a rival, but by the man who helps create you. In the end, these 6 feuds prove something few dare to say out loud. Even icons have enemies. Even legends like Ozzy leave behind a trail of bruise-egos and broken bonds. He may be the Prince of Darkness, but not everyone wanted to serve in his court.